Hello everyone and welcome to Contemporary Street Theatre Festival SPOT and its online educational program. Today and tomorrow we are going to talk about creating in public space. Why is it important? What challenges may lie ahead and what steps can be taken? My name is Monika.LT. I am a culture journalist and I will be moderating today's session. And I'm really excited to introduce our first speaker today, Jekaterina Lavrinec. She is a PhD urbanist and curator who applies participatory approach in her research and art practices. Jekaterina Lavrinec has more than 11 years experience as a researcher, participatory artist, and educator in urban studies. And today Katerina is going to talk about something really interesting, about co-creating the neighborhoods through art practices. But before we begin, a quick message to our viewers. Afterwards, there is going to be a Q&A. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comment section and we will try to answer them later on. So Jekaterina, thank you very much for joining us today and the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you so much, Monica, and thank you so much for the organizers of SPOT Festival. And it's really exciting to find new forms of cooperating during SPOT Festival, which usually takes place in public spaces. And now the organizers decided to set educational program for learning online. So I'm really looking forward also next presentations. And today we're going to speak about public spaces and the neighborhoods. And why neighborhoods and why public spaces? It's places in the city where sociality emerge, social connections emerge. We usually think of them as of something which already has happened, but in fact, it's exactly in public spaces and in community places we have this process of emerging trust and emerging cooperation. So what I propose to do is to go through some principles of core creating public spaces through art practices, because it's exactly art and creativity which helps us to re-examine, rediscover some principles which in our everyday life we take as for granted, and to look to rediscover them and to find some also interesting, I hope, interesting cases among these stories I'm going to share. So now I'm going to share my presentation with you and I will continue to speak. So I'm coming from a laboratory for urban games and research, Laimikis.LT, and some cases I'm going to draw upon during my presentation are coming from cooperative work with my colleague Julius Narkūnas, who is former architect and now is a creative person. So one of the important principles we draw upon in our practice for last decade with some more years is that we use public spaces for creating conditions for people to come together and to share time, skills, other resources. So among our resources we have time is the most important one. We come together to, when we spend time together, we share the most important resource, our life, some moments of our life, but also if we take part in public spaces actively. We also share our skills, our creativity, our attitudes, and so on and so on. So all kinds of events which help people to come together periodically to public spaces could be seen as laboratory for creativity and also laboratory for social connections. So as one of the examples of this kind of events, which is participatory event and which is very simple. It's so bubble gatherings, which we used to arrange since 2009 in Lithuanian cities, and each summertime more than 24 cities in Lithuania and also some cities outside Lithuania where Lithuanian communities are present took place. The idea was just to bring people together, to make soap bubbles together to the places which used to be, which were underused. So places with nice characteristics like greenery and some sitting places where you feel cozy and comfortable, but which lack some scenarios of use. We have quite a big amount of these kind of places in our cities, at least in Lithuania. So by proposing people to come together every second Monday with soap bubbles and making soap bubbles together, we also invited people just to bring their own ideas what they could do in public spaces. So by being physically in public spaces, and that's very important, that our body is primarily instrument of adjusting space and of taming public space. So just by physically being in public space, you can start changing it in many ways. And soap bubbles is also some kind of temporal architecture which transforms places when it comes in big amounts. So when people come together, they also can start thinking of what they can do in public spaces. And in the case of the soap bubble gatherings, we had a very wide palette in many Lithuanian cities when musicians came out to the places to perform something during this soap bubble event. For example, in Kaunas, it was very interesting how young people used the time after soap bubbles finishes in the evenings. They were thinking that, okay, we want to prolong the event and we want to do something more in the city center. So they started bringing sofas in public spaces, and it ended up with some sofa evenings with musicians on sofas playing with musical instruments on streets. And they were inviting more and more musicians to take sofas and to play on them. So it's the recipe is just to set some very simple frame scenario which could be filled further and developed further by people themselves. When you deal with public spaces, you usually deal with the users of the place, and you deal with collective behavior and with individual attitude. And the good thing is that actually our public spaces are full of trust. So people trust each other. And to illustrate this thesis, I would draw upon our small experiment we made in 2009 on the streets of Vilnius. We were inspired by the photographer Philip Halsman, who published his book, Jump book, in 1959. And in his book, it was a book of photography, and Philip Halsman, as a photographer, he used to take photos of all kinds of celebrities and also politicians. And at some point, he decided that this usual photography, it deals with the body which presents some kind of social position already. So if you're a politician, your body will be, it will present itself in a certain way, and this way is quite dull. So what he decided to do, he asked people just to jump for him. So at first it was celebrities who were jumping for Philip Halsman. He was making these jump photos, but later on he started taking photos of politicians, and even Queen's family in the UK, they were jumping for him. So, of course, he was a well-known photographer. So we decided to go out to the Vilnius streets and to ask people to jump for us. So you approach the stranger on the street and you make a first contact with him or her, and then you ask a stranger to jump for you. And what do you think? It's very easy to start this kind of thing on the street. So persons trust you when you meet you for the first time, when you start speaking to them, proposing some crazy scenario. And we really had a huge set of photos where also some families were taking part with their small kids, which were thrown into the air. Of course, catching them and making photos again and again, asking us to take photos again and again of these jumping families. And what we found is that really strangers, they trust each other. And it's something very important about the city and especially about public spaces. Public spaces are meant for strangers to meet, to make a contact with the people from some different groups, which you do not meet during your working time, of course, not at your home and so on. So it's exactly public space where we meet other people, people with other opinions, different from ours maybe. But it's the place to build trust. So we use art practices, creativity to build and strengthening the trust in public spaces. It is a bit different when you start working with community spaces in the neighborhood. Because when you step into the neighborhood, you deal not with the users of the places, but you deal with the owners of the place, with people who live in that place and who used to use or misuse some places in this neighborhood. So you deal with the system more or less stable of collective needs, attitudes, tensions, hopes, and so on and so on. So that requires a bit different attitude. You can't just make experiments in that community spaces so freely. At first, you need to go into the relations with the people of the neighborhood. And later on, during my presentation, I will make these parallels between working with public spaces and working with community spaces in the neighborhood, because there is something to learn from public spaces and to put these ideas, to bring them to the community spaces, but also there are some specific traits of community spaces which need to be discussed. So, as I told already, trust is a condition of social life, and it's usually our body, which is the primarily instrument on the streets, which we use for making the contact with the strangers. So for those people who are coming from choreography and use their body professionally as an instrument, it's maybe much more easier. But for us, as for people who are not dancers, we learned a lot about our own bodies as an instrument of building trust. And it's quite interesting how you construct yourself as a relaxed body to approach to the stranger and to get some trust from the stranger itself. So this primarily contact, of course, context, this physical contact, and this is important insight. Also, one of the another principle which needs to be kept in mind when we speak about public spaces and community spaces in the neighborhoods are micro practices. And here we can use the notion of light sociality, which was proposed by two geographers, Ash Amin and Nigel Thrift, in their works. They speak about micro connections in public spaces. They say that that social relations, they happen at first on the micro level. This micro level is a level of short glances, small gestures, small touch in public space, but also it can be studied, as I think, through some urban rituals. So now on the screen you see one of the statues, public monuments, which is competing with several other monuments around the world for the name of the smallest public monument. It is located in Sweden, in Stockholm, and it is called a Moon Watcher. And what is interesting about it, when it was installed in 1967, it appeared to accumulate a caring relations to this monument, because this monument is so small. People who were attending that place, they were leaving all kind of things there, and each time you come there you also can find that new hats and new scarves are there on the monument. So people from around the world are visiting this place. They see the signs which are left by other people, like candies, some coins, some notes, also scarves and hats, and they also want to make something good for that place. So they leave also their own signs. Of course, in these cases, in many places, you can also get some emergent narrative about that some wish can come true if you, for example, rub the leg of the monument, or if you leave some thing there. But in the case of this smallest monument, it's primarily a space of care. people just take care of this small creature, of this small moon watcher who is located there because of its size. So by this example, I want to show that public spaces are the places where urban rituals emerge. And these urban rituals could be read through some kind of science, physical science. And also through this science, we give signs to each other. And we create space of care. So it's not only about trust, but it's also about care. Public spaces are the place where we take care about even non-human objects. To illustrate this insight, I also would use the experiment which is recently presented, exposed at MoMA Museum. It is called TwinBot experiment. And it was made not by the artist, but by social researcher Kati Kinzer, who located cardboard robots in Washington Square Park in 2012. And her experiment was about, again, this trust and about interaction with non-human objects in public spaces. And what she found, locating the bot with some message of where this bot wants to go, because the park has different entrances and there are a lot of small roads there, small directions where people can go. So when she placed this bot, she was observing how many people will interact with the bots and how many people will help the bot to get to the place it needs. So her finding was that actually there is also film online, on Vimeo platform. You can browse it, TwinBot experiment. So there is this documentary about how people interact with the bot. But her finding was that it's around 20 people who are into interaction with the bot to help the creature to get to some of the entrances of the park where it needs to get. So it was very optimistic to see that people are inclined to help, not even to each other, but to some object. But this experiment also means that people interact through the non-human objects. So these interactions means that each person who starts helping the bot and then leaves this object in some place in the park trusts that some persons before it and after it will help, continue to help this bot. That means that we, being in public space, we make a premise that we are a part of network of other people who help each other and also trust each other. So that's why this experiment was successful. Each person knew that other person will continue maybe helping this creature. Another principle is working with public spaces and community spaces is that by adjusting public spaces, by bringing some small elements and also by bringing new projects to public spaces, we get new types of relations. So depending on what configuration of spaces we have, we get different kind of social interactions and social relations. It is valid both for the cases when we deal with some smaller objects, but also it is valid when we speak about the design of urban space. For example, here on the photo, you see the green field in Vilnius by our Neris river, which used to be completely empty and underused after it emerged, after the bridge nearby was built. And it took 5 years for people to tame the place and to start using it for very calm scenario, just for, observing the river, being there, having picnic in a very calm way. So it takes time to tame public spaces and it takes time to develop some scenarios for public spaces. But when it's set, it is very valuable thing to preserve. And when we start speaking about redesigning public spaces, redesigning community spaces, we need to understand how did they work before our project and before we come to this space. So how this space work? When we speak about smaller interventions in public spaces, so usually the process of creating interventions foreseeing the interactions between people. So if you set art process, creative process as a process of participation, of co-design, then you get also, as a result, you get the network of trust with the people, with the strangers who were involved into the designing of the public space and of using the public space. So one of the example is, which we broadly used since 2009, is kind of streets blocks or gatves blogas in Lithuania, or notice boards. It is valid both for public spaces and for neighborhood places that we need some spots where we can leave our notes, maybe share our observations about some processes, some things which are happening in the neighborhood or in the city. And it also, this kind of places where you leave the notes, they also can serve as meeting points, meeting places. So when you put the blog, this kind of desk on the street, in the transit area, then you get the place where people stop, where they start writing something, sharing something, and then you can call this place as a meeting place. You can even attribute some name for it. But when you come to the neighborhoods, it's very strange that in our neighborhoods, when we start working with the communities, it's not very usual that notice boards are used actively as a tool for getting in touch with the local people. Actually, notice boards is a very nice thing to start stepping in the neighborhood and to start building the trust with the neighbors and start to get in contact with the neighbors, because it's the place where you can get feedback even from those people who are not in the social network. So that's important to use analog media, not only online media, but also analogs in offline space to get in touch with people around. You can put various topics for these street blogs, starting with asking people about their places, roots in the cities, musics, books, sharing their opinions on some city projects, because in some places you can get the, and it's very usual that when municipalities set some projects for public spaces, they put notice boards where you can see the projects, what is pre-planned for the place. But you have no place to share actually your opinion there. And you only can go to the public meeting and share your insights about the place, but there is no place for collecting feedback. And that's very important to set this kind of places around the cities, especially when cities are rapidly changing, like Vilnius city. At this moment, we have a lot of public places which are going to be reconstructed and renovated. So it's very important to set these platforms around the cities to get feedback from the users of the places. And that's very crucial, because when we speak about, for example, sharing our opinions about public spaces online, we draw upon our imagination and image of the place, which is usually very different from the actual place. So there are a lot of people who can share their opinion about the place, but they're not the actual users of the place. And that's very crucial to address the changes to the users of the place, to understand who is using these places and who has got the knowledge about these places. So, of course, so these boards can be used in many, many ways. And it's such a typical instrument, but it's really can be used more in our everyday life. Moving from this notice board, as from the place for sharing some information, we also can speak about these places for sharing. Especially neighborhoods are places where people used to share all kind of things. When you have good neighbors, you can share things, but also when you provide neighborhoods possibility to set some places for sharing, you get very interesting objects there and sometimes insights about how these places could be used. So this street commoder was designed by my students during one of the workshops, summer school, and it was put in the public space at first. And we found that when you put this kind of object by one of the main streets in Vilnius, Gedimino Avenue, you get even some promotions from the musicians who promote their musical albums and all kind of very strange and interesting things. We have never thought that it will be so popular among people to share, not to take, but to put something for other people. So this urban furniture, which used to be in that public space for more than 9 months, it was never empty. every time we went there, we saw that there are all kind of things and messages people share. Of course, these kind of objects in the city, they need to be looked after. So that's one of the inconvenient things, actually, that when you put something in public spaces, and especially in the neighborhoods, you need to be an administrator of this place, or you need to find some other people who will administrate these things. In the case of this object, we had some parkour team from Vilnius so guys which were using all kind of surfaces in the city around this area for their crazy jumps and performances, and they used this commoder as well for their performances. And they started looking after this commoder so that everything would be okay there. So that's also nice to find some trusted person in the public space who spontaneously start continuing some activity in this place. Further thing which inspired these experiments with sharing places was urban furniture, which is a set of module blocks which could be rearranged in neighborhood places, and which could be designed by the needs, drawing upon the needs of the neighbors. So as an experiment, we set 4 neighborhoods. We took 4 neighborhoods from Vilnius. So we got in touch with the local dwellers, locals and local communities, and we proposed them to configure their own configuration, their own urban furniture from the blocks. So the interesting thing is that it also was kind of experiment about how much people trust to their public spaces in the neighborhoods or community spaces in the neighborhoods, because this furniture is combined of wooden blocks, which are very easy to move, and also concrete cubes, which makes it impossible to move the furniture and to bring it away from the public spaces. And we found that depending upon the type of the neighborhoods, some communities, they asked and preferred the furniture to be as light as possible. So in some places you get urban furniture which is very light to put from one place to another, and in some places, because people do not trust much to passers-by, they ask to put as much concrete cubes as possible. So urban furniture can be kind of experiment measuring the level of sociality and trust in the neighborhood, but also it's an instrument to promote the creativity of people of the neighborhood. During these kind of workshops of creating urban furniture, we, of course, invite local people to join and also to choose the color and configuration and so on and so on. And what we found is that people invent new functions for their furniture. So, for example, in one of the neighborhood's kids, they asked us to do 2 things. One is to make chessboards. So neighbors, they created chessboards for kids. And another thing is that kids wanted to use this kind of board for some competitions. So when you have winners standing on some kind of postament, they use this furniture for this kind of games and competitions. And another thing is, so you see this urban furniture having its life in different neighborhoods, in 4 neighborhoods, and then we were observing how long will it take for this furniture to be present in this neighborhood. So actually it was alive for minimum 3 years in each neighborhood. It was also interesting for us to find that colors actually, they can have political aspect. For example, in one of the neighborhoods, when we proposed to pick the colors, people of the neighborhood told us that, okay, they refuse to use blue color and some other colors because they're the colors of political parties, so they don't want to color their furniture in the colors of one political party's color, but they would prefer another political party to use the colors of other political party. So for us, it was quite interesting thing, and it's something each time when you step in the neighborhoods, you find that there is such a strange configuration of some principles and beliefs, and you never know actually what kind of beliefs you will meet in these spaces in the neighborhoods. And it's very important to keep the dialogue with the neighbors. One more principle I would like to share, it's go micro. So we were speaking about the urban furniture and the ways to reconfigure the public space, to adjust public spaces, but also it's important to understand that also on micro level you can bring kind of change, quite big change to the public spaces. So for example, using some small objects, you can create a system of navigation in public spaces. But also you can use them for all kind of interaction. So as an example, I propose here to overview a micro protest, an action which we set in 2012 at the square where the discussions about the monument, a huge monument, official monument emerged. And we proposed people just to share their opinion on the monument because users of the place were not involved into any public discussion about what they want to see in the public space. So because people's voices are usually so small in the discussions about public spaces and design of public spaces and monuments in public spaces, especially monuments in Lithuania, we proposed micro protests, so micro level for sharing the opinions about the square, Lukiškių Square in this case, and about what people would like to see as a monument, or maybe they do not want to see any monument there. So all kinds of opinion could emerge there. And in this case, we found that pigeons can be our friends and our co-actors. So people were day by day were leaving the messages with some ideas about the monuments. For example, monument can be huge but invisible, or monument can be a river, or monument can be a movement, and all kind of insights. So people were really very creative in proposing the ideas, and it was very easy to share, to come there and to share. You just use a small stick, toothstick, and some postcard or placard, or you can write by your hand, or even some small objects emerged in this place. And these micro protests, it took place for 2 months during summertime. And also we found that it's very nice to use pigeons as a part of this protest. So you put some corn and then pigeons start, their choreography in this place. So then we understood that pigeons are really kind of experts and also co-users of public spaces. So if you work with public spaces, you can use them as some actor of the place. And also go macro. So micro things works fine, and they redesign our visual field in the city when we start looking under the feet. And but also macro things, they change public spaces on a bigger level, bring visible changes. And here is another kind of playful protest of bringing, which the goal of which was to bring visibility to the wooden Šnipiškės neighborhood. Šnipiškės neighborhood, which is shrinking area with many social problems, and it is located by the municipality and by the growing area of skyscrapers. So to bring this visibility to Šnipiškės area, not to ignore the area, we brought huge letters, Šnipiškės letters, to the public space. And later these letters to the place by the municipality. And later these letters were used for experimenting with the playgrounds in the area. So we were using these letters together with the neighbors, people of the area, to arrange kind of neighbors' picnics in one area, then another area, just experimenting how these letters could be used, and also what kind of areas could become possibly public spaces in the neighborhoods, because this area lack public spaces. There used to be only streets where people used to meet, but there were no place for meeting for the people. So using these letters, we tried to create together with locals these public spaces, and which could become then permanent places for the meetings. Also interesting that these letters, because they're huge, and usually artists who are working with huge objects, they face the problem of where to keep the objects. So we proposed also locals to take care of some of the letters. So it appeared that people somehow they have preference for one letters over another. For example, even the designer Tomas Umbrasas, who designed these letters, he also asked us to keep letter K from this set if we need some help, so that he can help us and keep this letter. So we were thinking also about this possibility of letters to be stolen, because when you put this kind of light object in public space, because they're created for being light and being reconfigured and brought from one place to another. So we also thought that even if they are stolen and if they are staying in this area, it will be interesting at some point using Google Maps or some other navigation systems to find this kind of these letters and to just to search for them in the yard. So it brings kind of detective for this set. How to use this set. So these kind of interventions, even if they're temporal ones, so they create new meeting spots and also new connections, and little by little they help to arrange public spaces. So in fact, after experimenting with this kind of urban furniture, letters, all kind of events in public spaces in the neighborhoods, we little by little we see how public spaces start emerging. Even if it's an area where nothing used to be there before, maybe some buildings which were destroyed. For example, in case of this Dragonsfield and in Šnipiškės in the district I was talking about, there was some old school which was demolished, and after the school was demolished, this public area, municipal land, not municipal, but governmental land was just being empty for the decades. And after all these kind of experiments, people little by little start addressing this place as a public space, and they start meeting and set their own meetings in this place, and then they start taking care of this place, and new objects are being placed there, like swings, for example, which are placed by neighbors, or some bookshelves, places for sharing the books, and so on and so on. So starting from the temporal things and temporal games, temporal creativity, then you move little by little to this long-term changes in the place. And it's exactly how public spaces can be designed. If you want to design them together with people, with the users and with the owners of the place, then you need to reserve much longer time than it's usually reserved for preparing some projects for public space. For example, when you design project for public space at municipality, you have much more shorter time. Nowadays it's very rapid process in Vilnius city, but when you work you work with the public space involving people to the process, then it will take more than several years to crystallize the idea how the place will look like, and to understand what people want to see there and how they used to use the place, and so on and so on. So time is really a very valuable resource which need to be used and implemented into the project for public spaces. So at this moment, the place we were working with, experimenting with these public place functions, now they turned into official public spaces, and the municipality set planning process for these public spaces, but it emerged from bottom up by people experimenting with this place and crystallizing the vision for these places. And what is interesting about this project is also that because of the level of involvement of the locals to the designing and experimenting with the public place, these projects which were set by municipalities, they also are co-designed with local people. So that's very valuable things, that little by little practices of designing public spaces in Vilnius city, they're changing alongside with the competences, growing competences of the people who are users of these neighborhoods and public places. So to summarize these principles is that when you work with public spaces by introducing some new objects, smaller and bigger ones, and introducing new activities, you reconfigure and reanimate public space, and you bring also new links and new routes to the place. That's important because we can remember here the notion of mental maps, which was used by Kevin Lynch in the 80s. And this notion, this urbanist Kevin Lynch here speaks about the cities and spaces using this, stressing out that we navigate city spaces drawing upon our mental maps. So we trust our mental maps, the image of the city, how we perceive the city. And these mental maps, they're different from the objective maps. And it's very important whether we have some links between spaces in our mentality, on our mental map. For example, you can pass the same route day by day, year by year, and you will never use some shortcut because it's not on your mental map. So it's very important to open up the vision of the users of the place, to invite users to navigate some other places in the city and to widen our mental map of the city. So to illustrate it, I again come back to this neighborhood of Šnipiškės. So what you see on your screen, it's not a collage. Sometimes when I show this photo outside Lithuania, people are asking if it's a real space. Yes, it is. So it's a space where many different layers from different period of times are coexisting, and also different social ways of living are coexisting. So just to provide you some insights about how this neighborhood looks like and looked like I share some photos. So it's a neighborhood which is historical one. It's already well known, and we see it from the documents, historical documents in the 16th and 17th century. And it's suburbia of Vilnius. And now it's a part of Vilnius and pretty much close to the city center. But what is interesting about it, it's materiality of this neighborhood. So when we're working with public spaces, and especially with the places in the neighborhood, we need to pay attention, I think, to this materiality, because in many places we have unique combinations of materials and also of people's skills of how to deal with these materials. For example, in this neighborhood where you find the buildings of the end of 19th century, the beginning of 20th century, you have these wooden houses, and you have also skills of people to make patches for their wooden objects, wooden houses. So they use all kinds of materials. And when I bring artists to this neighborhood, that's just to share and to show them this rich materiality of the place, they really enjoy this place, which you see on the screen. These patches, colorful patches of 3 colors, they usually think that it's kind of work of art, but it's not. It's just local people who are patching their property. And from this everyday life in the neighborhood, you get a lot of inspiration, actually, of using different materials and different colors. Here is one more example of very interesting doors in this neighborhood and this strange materiality. And this neighborhood, it used to be referred for a long time as a criminal district. So the image of the neighborhood used to be very complicated, and it also brought pressure on the people themselves in the neighborhood. And it was something which could be changed through art practices. For example, bringing out the materiality from the neighborhood to some exhibitions, inviting people to contribute to these exhibitions. And as for example, this exhibition which took place in China 2 years ago, Biennial of Urbanism and Architecture, where we showed this rich materiality of the neighborhood. So some other examples of these materials, layers, and it's something which we start missing in our nowadays cities, when cities are being developed not on the base of private interest, private priority financial interests. Then we get rid of multiple layers and interesting objects and materials in the cities. And our cities become more and more sterile. They lack this richness of surfaces. So the question is then how to involve people to the redesigning the image of the neighborhood and to get this proudness from living in pride from living in this neighborhood. One of the things we said was a very simple method. It's creating mosaics from tiles, which is a very cheap method, and in this sense is sustainable one. So if materials are cheap and available, if you can find them in your everyday surrounding, then you as a local can contribute to some art practices and this in the neighborhood, and these art practices can be ongoing. It can continue even when you as an inspiration go out from the neighborhood. So day by day, together with locals and especially kids of the neighborhoods, we were creating these ceramic objects in the neighborhood, mosaics. And why mosaics? It's because the neighborhood was well known in 17th century for its ceramic workshop. So it's not by chance that we used these ceramics. It's because of the history of the neighborhood that it was famous for its clay carriers and these ceramic workshops. So day by day, after creating these mosaics, we found two things. One thing is that people, when they see strangers who are starting making mosaics, but they see the strangers day by day, and the strangers are doing something interesting, so people start trusting you. So in case of this workshop, after 2 weeks of decorating poles, electric poles in the neighborhood together with kids who already joined us, we met the local lady who came with the key from the garage of her husband and gave us a key, asking us to use the ceramic tiles, colorful ceramic tiles, which were put in the garage of her husband, saying that she was observing us and she wants us to use the tiles which she used to collect during her life because she just loves art, as she explained, and she loves colors. So she collected these ceramic tiles, and that was also the key to the trust of the neighborhood and the key to the trust of this local community. And another thing we noticed is that after some time, a ceramic route emerged in the neighborhood, and it was interesting thing because before people didn't have the opportunity to come to this neighborhood and to explore. So you are living in Vilnius, in other district, and you're afraid of going to this Šnipiškės neighborhood because it's presented as criminal district, although it's very interesting to explore. And it's exactly ceramics. So you see here on the drawing of my colleague Julius, the ceramic root, kind of root, which is already quite inviting. So you can be interested as a representative of a different district and to come to the neighborhood to explore. And this really opened up all kinds of activities of the local people themselves. For example, here you see our local representative, Asta, who started running excursions using all kinds of stories, local stories and facts, historical facts of the neighborhood, both for local Vilnius people and for foreigners who are coming, visitors of Vilnius. And more and more of initiatives of this kind emerged in the area. So you start from one small thing, you continue this thing, you are being physically present in the neighborhood, which is super important, and then you get the result. So it's the involvement of the local people who start developing their own initiatives. And in this case, it's success. So the measure for success of art practices in the neighborhoods for us, as for Laimikis team, is exactly the involvement of the local people. And if local people are eager to continue some activities in the neighborhood, to invest their time and energy to their neighborhood. So we thought of games then, that games and these routes, somehow they also inspired the idea that the neighborhood is going to be more and more open because more and more excursions come there. But what if we use some playful formats for accumulating the interest of people from other areas to this neighborhood through some playful activity? And as a laboratory for urban games and research, we use games a lot. Games a lot as a tool for working with public spaces, and we think that it's one of the most efficient tools for opening up the neighborhoods, which even by the dwellers of the neighborhood sometimes are considered as not interesting places. You know, in Vilnius, for example, we have a lot of neighborhoods which the residents of which think nicely about their place, but they will say usually that there is nothing to see in their neighborhoods. So playful attitudes and all kinds of games, they can open up this vision even of local people to their local everyday surrounding. So what we designed for this neighborhood and what appeared to be a kind of universal tool also for other neighborhoods for accumulating the stories and the images of the change in neighborhoods, because it's also important to keep in mind that this Šnipiškės district we worked with and still continue working with is changing district. So each day you see the change in panorama of the neighborhood, because wooden architecture during the process of construction and redevelopment of the area, because more and more buildings are popping up in the area, and also more skyscrapers, office skyscrapers are popping up in the area. You lose a lot of layers, historical layers, and you use this historical materiality. So it is important also to think how to accumulate this kind of materials on the neighborhood so that people would be involved into preservation, but also into this active exploration of the neighborhood. And we were thinking that, okay, we have all kinds of archives, and there are a lot of archives, historical archives dedicated to the neighborhoods. But the problem with archives is that archives are usually passively used. So you have some place where the materials are brought, but you need to have some inner motivation to go there and to explore it. And we thought that why not use game for accumulating the materials and for using them actively, so that day by day people could explore the area and also to see the changes of the area. So that's how we designed the matrix, kind of matrix for the game, which we called Urbingo. It was before Pokemon Go, but somehow coincide. And we found that it's really effective instrument for promoting explorations of the everyday areas in our cities, of the neighborhoods. And it's also open in these neighborhoods for people from our side. And also it brings exactly this pride about being a resident of some neighborhood, even if this neighborhood have been neglected for a long time via mass media. So another thing which is important with the games and with this playful attitude and also art practices in the neighborhood is that we change the view upon the everyday surroundings. So, for example, with this game, Urbingo, which consists of a map and of cards, with the elements and panoramas of the neighborhood, we have all kind of elements. You see some of cards on your screen, and you see that some cards are dedicated to the tiles which you see under your feet, and some are dedicated to panoramas and some to the roofs. So you need, when you navigate the neighborhood, you need to open up your view. And in visual anthropology, we say that in our usual life, when we are working people, we usually have very narrow corridor, visual corridor, by which we navigate the city. So we look straight forward, and we have not so much time to explore around. When you are a kid, you usually explore around because you have more time. So you can look under your feet, you can look to many sides. And when you are tourists, we usually recognize tourists by their view on the roofs. You know, tourists are going through the cities, new cities, exploring the facades and the roofs of the city. So their look usually is a bit upper. It's upper than the look of the dweller of the city, the resident of the city. So with the game, we open up all kind of views. We inspire people to explore under their feet, around, aside, to get into more active mode towards their neighborhood. And that's important effect of the games and of this creativity in the neighborhood. Also, another thing is to be attentive to everyday details which used to be perceived as dull things. For example, this kind of ventilation objects in the area. Also, another thing is this change of the colors and change of the plants in the neighborhood. For example, when you play the game in different seasons, then the picture was taken, the card was made, then you have to be a kind of detective because you see new colors and maybe sometimes even the houses can be repainted. So you need to be attentive to every detail which will prompt you that it's exactly the area you want to find. Also with these objects, these ventilation objects, I just will, it reminded me of one episode when we had among the players some group which attended the National Gallery next to this place. And in the National Gallery they saw the sculptures by Navakas, Lithuanian artist, well-known Lithuanian artist. And then the sculptures inspired them to search for new objects which were created by Navakas, let's say. And when they saw these simple ventilation objects, they thought that it's also an art object which was created by this sculpture and but by this artist. And they were very proud that they found this object. But actually, it's not just everyday thing. It's just used for, it has its function. It's not an art. But the game also, it promotes this renewing the vision upon the everyday surrounding. It's also inspires you to find even some art in objects which are not an art object. After setting this game, what we found that local people, they were so inspired by, this navigation, possibility to navigate their own area, that they started challenging each other, and also us as a team, sending us new and new photos of some objects, asking us to find these objects in the neighborhood. So by this, we found that in this wooden area, we have our own concrete sphinx. And also we have even some kind of Vikings ship, although river is quite far away from this place. But this kind of matrix, playful matrix, it inspires locals to explore their own surrounding and then to challenge each other. And by collecting this kind of images, we build this actively used archive for the neighborhood. And then one more thing is that we understood that this kind of archive, they are much needed for the other neighborhoods as well, because they also they promote this active position of the residents for their surrounding. So few more examples from other cities, because this game, we understood that it's a good matrix for other cities also to promote their own materiality and their own public spaces and use of public spaces of the neighborhoods by searching for some objects and searching for some panoramas. So we had some workshops with people from creative organizations from Romania, and co-designed the game with them for Alba Iulia, Romanian city. And in each city you get different layers of these elements and materials in public spaces, which need to be somehow preserved and which could be, and also there are so many stories connected with them. So the stories are also accumulated to this game as well. So one more example is coming from the Liverpool. We were invited to the Liverpool to co-create the game with the local people of the area, which used to be heritage area, maritime area, which also undergoes through the rapid redevelopment. So when the redevelopment comes to the cities, to the areas, to the neighborhoods, then people start understanding that they are going to lose some very valuable things in their area. And then they need kind of promotion for this material layers and objects in their neighborhoods, for their neighborhoods and the history of the neighborhood. So games and all kind of art events can do that, can be instrumental for promoting the history of the places. One more example is coming from Minsk, and here we have even pretty much different situation. We used the same matrix of Urbingo for working with art studios, so with inner spaces of the artists, where artists used to work. And here we had co-curators from Irina Solomatina and Olga Barushko, who opened up, who were thinking about opening up art art workshops for people from our side, just to get know what is going on in the city. So it's not much about public spaces, it's about private spaces, but the same matrix can be also used for opening some inner spaces of the city, making them temporarily open for the public. So they will never become public spaces, but they can be open from time to time. That's also important, that art practices, they open the spaces which used to be closed for a long time. Here you can use all kinds of elements. It's not only game which can open up the spaces. And the last thing I would like to mention here is by going back to the neighborhood, Šnipiškės, is that when you work with the neighborhoods and you reserve some time of working there, so it's not only one-time event in the neighborhood, but it's continuing work, which takes 3, 5, 6, 7 years. So then you cooperate with the locals and also with kids. And when you cooperate with kids, actually, inevitably, you find that kids are very fast in gaining these new skills. And what we got in the neighborhood of Šnipiškės, and we never thought about this effect, but it was very inspiring for us that local kids who were taking part in all kinds of art events and activities with us in this neighborhood, they started feeling artists themselves, and feeling organizers of creative events and some cultural events themselves. So one day I got a phone call from the kids of this area, and they asked me, please, can you bring us a professional designer? And I was asking, why professional designer? And they told me, we're going to arrange our own event in the public space we co-developed with this Dragon's Field. And we wrote a message for the dwellers of the area, but because of our kids' writing, people do not trust that it's a serious event. So we need a serious designer, a professional designer, to design us a poster so that people would know that it's serious. So that's how kids, little by little, participating in the events which are arranged by some team, creative team, they start being creating team themselves. And now it was an inspiration for me also of thinking that, you know, in non-formal education, we usually bring kids and youngsters and also all people of all ages to some places, special places where we share some creative skills with people. But actually, it's worth thinking about going to the neighborhood and sharing the skills on a daily basis with local people, bringing new skills and new competences to the neighborhoods, because these kids are going, some of them at least, are going to live in this neighborhood, and they continue to invest their time and energy and their creativity to this neighborhood. So by investing to their communities and to the people of the neighborhood, you also invest to the better future and better life of the neighborhood. So that's what actually art activities in the neighborhoods do. That the main effect of these art activities, that you can bring visible change, their long-term change, through bringing new skills and new experience to people of the neighborhoods. So I really, I would really would like to inspire you to think about kids as of co-designers of public places and as of co-designers of neighborhoods. So thank you so much for your attention. I will finish my presentation. Let's get in touch if you want, and I will be waiting for your questions. Just a moment, I will come back. Okay.
Jekaterina, so thank you very much. It's been really interesting. And listening to your presentation, I've been thinking, what are the ways to evaluate whether a particular space needs an artistic intervention? For example, how can one make sure that his or her art practices could actually be of value to that particular neighborhood?
You know, in our case, it's places themselves which inspire art practices. So it's not that you have some idea and you go to the place and you bring this pre-designed idea to the place, but it's rather the place which prompts you by its characteristics, its arrangement, what you can do there. So I also would propose to think that artists usually work with limited resources, and people of the neighborhoods, they have limited resources. They're not business companies, you know, and they're not municipality which get these huge budgets. So that means that everything which you can do there, it should be sustainable. So you must think about resources, what you really could do and what would be not very, you know, expensive for you, and what would be able then to, what you could continue for a longer time. So that's why we use these soap bubbles for public space, and it's not only us who bring these soap bubbles, it's people around who are bringing them. It's also, that's why ceramic tiles, which are very cheap to use for these effects, and it's all kind of materials you really can involve other people to contribute. And it's also interesting to think, actually, when you start designing these art processes for the neighborhood, to think about the networks also of exchange. So, for example, if we need ceramic tiles, and at first we didn't have this contact with the local lady who proposed us to use her ceramics, we were making contacts with the shops around to donate some broken, you know, ceramics for us. So that's also important, because during your art process, you can establish all kind of connections in the neighborhood. And that's what actually bring difference between working with neighborhoods and working with public spaces. In public spaces, you have only users. In neighborhoods, you have owners. So people who are there for a long time, and they can share some materials also. And if they're interested, they will contribute. Mm-hmm.
And here in Vilnius, there's an ongoing discussion about what to do with our public spaces. And it seems that with some spots, we are actually really far from reaching a consensus. So how do you see the role of an artist in this context? Should artists, for example, try to find artistic solutions, or on the contrary, maybe they should reflect on that disagreement?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would go for the second option, to reflect on disagreement. We really need to accept that there are conflicting positions nowadays in Vilnius and in Lithuania when it comes to the public spaces and design of public spaces. And these conflicts, they go to official level. These are conflicts between different institutions, organizations, but also informal users of the places. And also among informal users, you have different interest groups. But also, I think that artists are important for designing the tools and the platforms for people to start, talking there, to start sharing their opinions and to start a dialogue. We really need to promote somehow the dialogue between these different groups. And that's why I also trust these simple methods, starting from these notice boards which are traveling around the city and which proposes to meet and to discuss by the board some changes of the city, till some events like for speakers to present their position in public space and to get some feedback from participants. So we need to use public spaces as platforms for this dialogue. And that's why we need artists also to get this focus that, public space can work as a tool itself, dialogue tool itself. So how we need to redesign a bit it to bring more people there to discuss things which are important for the public space. I really believe that the changes of the public spaces must be discussed in the public spaces, not in the cabinets, and not by writing letters, official letters to municipalities, and then you get some official feedback from municipality. But it's not productive and it's not creative. Much more better to go to the place itself.
Mm-hmm. And during your presentation, you mentioned that dealing with public space means dealing with individual attitudes, and those attitudes can be very different, obviously. So does it mean that conflicts are inseparable from public spaces and urban planning, or can they be avoided? In our experience, of course, there are a lot of conflicts at this time in Vilnius when we speak about public spaces, but in the cities where they have strong traditions of dialogue, for example, and of storytelling, actually, of sharing local stories, which is very important. There they have this tradition of not making conflicts, but making talks. So you come together with some, candies and the tea, and you have an evening tea and you talk with people with different opinions about what is going to happen in public space and whether you like it or not. And it can take time. So it's important to understand that these dialogues, they need some time, several meetings, series of meetings, maybe several months and even years to get in contact and to understand each other. So that's the most important thing. Mm-hmm. So I believe that it's not inevitably that public space is about conflict, but public spaces are always about different opinions. And the question is how these different opinions are coming together and who is bringing them together. So it's important that the person who is bringing them together is a trusted person. And it's good if this person is an artist or creative, who is not going to bring one more perspective into this conflictual situation, but who will bring some balance between these different positions and will propose to talk. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that there are some positive examples on how we can talk. So can you name a few cities that you think are good at that?
Yeah, when I was working with Liverpool, for example, about their heritage, on their heritage site, you have a lot of families there. Some families are newcomers who are welcoming these changes in the city and in the heritage site, and other families are families of many, many generations who are living in that place. And of course, their perspectives on the place are very different. But when the game is introduced as a tool for opening up the view on the place, then both sides are deciding that, okay, it's interesting and important for us to use this game. Both newcomers and elderly families, they're interested in testing this tool, but this tool is nicely presented to them much before the game is set. So there are several events of several meetings. You come there for like half of the year before the actual process of making the game is starting. And of course, it's very soft tool. It's not about changing the area itself, but if it will come to the changing area itself. Another example is coming from Stirling City, from Scotland, where they used to have these storytelling clubs, which is a very interesting idea, actually, and it's a tradition, because kids are coming together with some tutors, and they are sharing. They learn how to share stories. Then the elderly members of communities, they come together once per week, and they share their opinions about their city. And then when you come there, invited by the municipality with other creatives, proposing some ideas for public spaces, in the beginning you have to listen to the different opinions. But these different opinions have been discussed already for many, many times. People feel respect to each other. They present their different opinions already knowing about each other. And then you as an artist, you are not in the conflicting situation. You just listening to different materials and then proposing your own directions, which then are being discussed by locals themselves. So this tradition of discussing things publicly, not being afraid of different opinions, because, for example, in Lithuania, we usually if we do not want some conflict, we keep our tongue closed. We do not close, but mouth closed. So there are a lot of silent conflicts in Lithuania because we're not used to speak about them.
And you mentioned that those temporary artistic interventions may have a long-term effect on the neighborhood. So what are the ways to achieve that, if that's our aim?
So that's important to understand that it's not object which matters in the end when you work with public space and create something with people, but it's new skills and new insights about public spaces which will stay with these people who are taking part in your event. So investing into these art practices in public space, you invest into the knowledge of people. You develop and you develop your own knowledge as well, because there are so many users of the place who use the places in different ways. And it's very interesting to learn from them. For example, for the architects, I definitely would propose to go to the public space just to observe how people are using public space, because there are so many insights. So by creating this art process, co-creating it, inviting people to create together with you, you spread the knowledge, you co-create the knowledge as well. So knowledge is something which will stay there for much more longer time than our objects are, and especially than our performances state. For example, when you are making performances in public space, then it's also bodily experience which expands for the people who are coming there for this experience and take part in your performance. Even, when you're observing some parkour people jumping from one surface to another in the city, just being able to observe this kind of performances. You also, despite you will never jump like that, and I will never try, but then you expand your experience about how you can use surface in a different way. And as a designer, you also can think then about making it more convenient for parkour people to jump, if you're making objects for the public space.
So what makes public space a good public space?
It should be open public space. So there should be a notion that everyone can contribute to the public space. Actually, in Lithuania, we're quite in a good condition because what concerns public space, we have a big gray zone in our law. in some other countries, we have a lot of restrictions connected to the public space. For example, there are cities where you are restricted to sing in public space publicly. So you need to have special permission from municipality that you can sing in public space. So for performers, it's a challenge to work, for example, with some Finland cities. But in Lithuania, we're in the position that public spaces are quite open, at least on the level of the law. But when it comes to the discussions about how the spaces could be rearranged and what projects we need, and what kind of monument there should be, there are not so much discussions, actually. It's only, we get the notice from the municipality that it will be done in this and that way in many, many cases. So that's exactly what we need to improve our public space. We need to reserve more time for the dialogue, and we need to reserve more time and not to be afraid of involving people into the discussion. It's usually seen as a threat for the project, that if people are coming to discuss something, they will ruin the project. It's not a thing, actually. People are eager to improve the project and to improve public spaces. So the most important thing is to keep public spaces open, and also the process of design of public spaces also to keep it open, to make it possible for other people to join, of people of different interest group. And what else? It's also important, my colleagues from Japan, they say that good public space is a space which is suitable for picnics. That means that it's a measure for them. If they come to some square and they say, it will be good to arrange a picnic here. So that means that the public space is good, because that means that you can come there in a bigger group, but you also can be alone. You can arrange your space in the way you like. It's not only benches you will sit upon, but you can also maybe lay on the grass. So there are different possibilities for your body to be in public space. And these possibilities are informal. So if you have a lot of gates, small gates in public spaces, for example, in some park which was redesigned 5 years ago, I think, in Vilnius, we have very small gates in this around green areas, Bernardino garden in Vilnius. And these small gates, they prevent people of going and using the green area, actually. So sometimes these small things which prevent you from using public space more actively are also limiting your creativity. Maybe in some official spaces you really need to do so, but in public spaces, I think that in our cities nowadays, we really need to look forward the solutions which would promote creativity of the users of the space, so that it wouldn't be not municipality or some commercial organization which feels capability to come and to change public space. We need to promote people's creativity, the creativity of users. Maybe it will be on the smaller scale because their resources are smaller, but it's worth doing it, because if we're a city where the residents are free in expressing their creativity, then we are a livable city, and then we become attractive city, and then it's inspiring for ourselves. So that's the most important thing. So places where you can arrange picnic and you feel free to arrange some performance for the others, with the others.
And do you see some spots, some neighborhoods that need artistic interventions in Vilnius right now?
Oh, there are many of them, actually. I think
can you name a few?
You can take any so-called sleeping district. We have this multi-stored blocks of houses, areas which were developed during Soviet period. And there we have a lot of greenery, actually. So this greenery is a fantastic potential for all kind of artistic interventions and performances, together with the locals, of course, because they are owners of these spaces around. Exactly for the reason to promote this understanding that we have such a huge value, these green spaces, open spaces in the neighborhoods, we need these artistic interventions there and these artistic performances. So any district like Fabijoniškės, Šnipiškės, Karoliniškės, whatever any district needs that, I think, at this moment. And it's very good because if we will get these performances in these districts, in these areas, it will inspire local creativity, and it will be alive for many, many years then.
However, street art and its many forms don't have very deep roots in Lithuania. In your opinion, what are the reasons for that, and why is it still difficult for some artists to just go and create something in public spaces?
It's a difficult question. I do not know why, actually. In fact, the groups which started experimenting with the public spaces and working exactly with public spaces were quite young here. So it's 12 years, 10 years, 9 years. And but also in parallel, we have these street artists who started from graffiti, and then they moved to the street art working with the surfaces of the buildings. And it's also quite young movement. I think that it's connected with the fact that it's only 30 years we have these open public spaces which we could interpret in the way we could. So it took some years for generations to become, conscious and to go out to the streets. And now we have actually change in generation. When I ask street artists where the younger generation of street artists is, because now I lack a bit of street art. Now we have this change of generation. So our generation is big elder, and now we are more and more slowly moving in with these public spaces. So we become slower and slower, and we move to some other areas as well. But we're waiting for new generations to come. So it's also about, generations and their attitude and their possibilities. And I also think that it's about the resources, of course. Did you find a way to accumulate and to use the resources for good artworks in public spaces?
And we have some questions from the audience. The first one is how to start a discussion between municipality, business, and citizens regarding the use of public space. So you talked a little bit about this discussion, but maybe you can elaborate on how to include business in this whole talk, and should we include it?
That's interesting. Actually, sometimes business itself is quite present in public spaces, and they are quite easy to be involved into the discussion. I would say that it's much more difficult to involve ministries which are also responsible for the public space. For example, in Lithuania, it's Ministry of Environment, which is responsible actually, and also some other ministries like Finance, Ministry of Finances, which is distributing European Union's funds to municipalities. They also need to have some kind of criteria for the quality for public spaces. I would start physically from picking the public space and arranging some event in public spaces, thinking of what kind of elements I need to involve. For example, in some cases we involved models of the public spaces, inviting also architects to contribute to some creative workshop. People need to come together, but to come together not in the cabinet, but in the public space itself, to discuss what they see, what they agree about and what they disagree about, and to meet people there in the public space. For example, we had this experience with the Vilnius municipality recently with a project with a place for which the project in which they proposed to cut trees from the road primarily was implemented. And the place itself is quite noisy. So from the road, you hear the noise. But when you are in the cabinet and you design the project, you do not know nothing about the noise. You just see that there is a road. It's not a big one, so there is no noise. But if you meet in the public space itself and you rediscuss the project and you hear the noise, so everyone in the group, they acknowledge the fact that it's noisy, and they can't, then deny this problem. So going out to the public space, arranging the event, and what concerns business, I would really approach local businesses who are located by the place you want to discuss. And also some bigger businesses also can be interested. I would say, for example, in the Lukiškių Square, there was very nice advertisement campaign 5 years ago when some bread producer of bread was planting the field of the field of not grains, but some plants which are used for the seeds. I don't know how to call this kind of plant, but it was very nice field which was planted in at Lukiškių Square. And during these bubble events, the kids, they were used to go to this field and to navigate this field. And for photographers, it also was a nice thing to use for their photos. So business already was presented there. And if we needed their help and their contribution, we would go there and asking them to join. It's not a bad thing to actually involve business, especially local businesses, into the projects for public spaces.
Also, how events and festivals like SPOT can contribute to long-term plans and changes of the public space.
Oh, SPOT is a huge help, in rediscovering public spaces, their potential, opening up their potential, and also opening up the spaces which Vilnius people were not used to use and were not used to attend. So that's one of the most important things. And the other thing is that by inviting fantastic artists to Vilnius to contribute to the public spaces here and to show their performances, it's also a huge contribution to the knowledge about how to use public spaces and what are the possibilities of public spaces which we are not aware about before. So it's opening up the perspective on your own city, and that's super important for us nowadays. I think that we need to bring more and more attention of people from various official institutions to these kind of events. It's really not only entertainment. It's really about exploration of these public spaces and learning about them. And we need to learn so much. It's because it's up to our public spaces how we define, city life, how we understand city life. If we are not able to design and to discuss the design of public spaces in the way it will not erase conflicts, then something wrong with our attitude toward the city itself. We're not, good citizens then if we can't use public spaces. So artists, exactly through a SPOT event, we can learn more about our public spaces and how it can be discussed also.
And do you think that more events like that are needed in Vilnius or
Of course, yeah. Yeah, we need them so much actually, because we have really a lot of areas which are not that much used. We also have this challenge with motorization in the city, which is taking a lot of free area which could be used for the benefits of the residents of neighborhoods and districts. So that's why we also need this contribution to these discussions more and more. The more we will have this kind of events, the better.
Jekaterina, thank you very much. It's been great talking to you, and thanks to all who watched us. And I hope we'll meet in other sessions today and tomorrow. Bye.
Thank you, Monica, and goodbye to all.